Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which is looking at Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Only say the name twice, never three, is expected to have a pretty strong opening weekend, at least in the domestic market. Expected to make almost $100+ million, in fact, in the domestic marketplace. I did see this movie last night, and I will ultimately say I have some doubts about that, only because I did not like the film all that much. That being said, a lot of the people in the audience that I saw it with did seem to enjoy it quite a bit, and so I do suspect this opening will probably be pretty strong, though it would not surprise me to see massive drop-offs after the fact. The one thing that could potentially change that are actually two factors, and that is, of course, that the older crowds might actually want to show up for people like Michael Keaton, who really gives it in this performance once again, is able to truly capture the magic once again of the role of Beetlejuice. But then also the fact that you do have the likes of Jenna Ortega in here, who could potentially drive some of those younger audience members out, and she also gives a pretty strong performance in this film. But that all being said, the film is still quite a bit of a narrative mess, and so you never know what can happen with a movie like this. But we'll talk about it. We'll also talk about a bunch of other films out there and where they're expected to do this weekend as well. But before going any further, please make sure you smash that like button, lab that fire button over on Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well. Also make sure you are subscribed, hit that bell, that way you get notified every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So of course, over here on Box Office Theory, we get a couple of pieces of information. First, the traditional tracking, so this is the likes of people like Deadline and other mainstream shill media news, say that right now they're projecting the film to make around $80+ million in the domestic market in its opening weekend. Again, that sounds about right based off of kind of the size of the theater that I went to last night. It was definitely on the higher end of things, a lot more well attended than a film like Alien Romulus, for instance, but also not quite to the same level as a film like Deadpool and Wolverine. Still very, very strong nonetheless that we are expecting to see for this movie. I do think, though, that the Box Office Theory numbers are going to be probably a bit more accurate here, where right now, according to Sean Robbins over on Box Office Theory, he's projecting the film to make between $95 and $125 million in its domestic opening. And again, I think this film will definitely open north of $100 million. Even again, the film doesn't have to mean necessarily all that great. All that really matters is your fan reaction, and all that really matters is your word of mouth. And it definitely does seem that it might be a mixed reaction from this movie, but it seems like enough people are going to be driven out to it. And as I mentioned before, I think some of the major factors there are, of course, Michael Keaton for some of those older audience members, and then also you have Jenna Ortega being able to appeal to those younger audience members. And as we all know, right, actors themselves do not sell tickets to movies because it really depends on what kind of movie that they are in. That this is the kind of movie, though, that I think a lot of fans of Jenna Ortega are going to be much more drawn to go see, as it's going to be very reminiscent of her performances in roles like that of Wednesday Addams on the show Wednesday. Again, very, very similar macabre themes going on in the film Beetlejuice, so don't be surprised if that is able to be the case. And then, of course, Michael Keaton. People want to see Michael Keaton. People want to see him in this role, really, again, shining once again. But to what level, to what degree? That is always something that really just cannot possibly be accounted for. But the fact remains, yeah, this film right now projected to do quite well. Going into the full chart on Box Office Theory, they're saying around $104 million is expected over its opening weekend. And as I mentioned, I think that sounds about right. I think somewhere around $100 million is probably where this film is going to end up. We'll know a lot more today after the Thursday numbers, the Thursday preview numbers come out. But something tells me that those numbers will be pretty strong. Again, I saw theater last night, and it was pretty well attended. That early IMAX showing was very, very well attended. So I can really only speak to that and compare it to other films that I've seen, and seeing how much more people were in there versus that of Alien Romulus. Makes sense to me for the film to be around $100 million domestic. Deadpool Wolverine is still expected to be in the discussion, at least for the top three. Expected to make $7.9 million, so finally getting bumped out of that number one spot. Remember, it has been bumped out once before when Alien Romulus first opened, but Deadpool Wolverine continuing to show some very, very strong numbers here. With $7.9 million, it also brings its total domestic to $614 million, which is the reason why I've said for a while now that don't be surprised to get the movie to around $650 million domestic, which is, again, would be very darn impressive for a film like it. It's been out for as long as it has, and also as a rated R film as well, right? That really does make quite a bit of difference. Alien Romulus is expected to take the number 3 spot once again with $4 million and around $96.5 million total domestic. Expected to probably get to around $100 million in the next week or two. And again, film that is going to be making its money back very, very soon. The biggest problem that it really has right now financially is how much money it's making in China versus any other market in the world. It ends with us still in the discussion as well and could potentially put up a battle against Alien Romulus. Right now, those projections are again within about $100,000 of each other, so don't be surprised if those films kind of battle out for that number 3 spot. Twisters is also still in the discussion as well, so very surprising and very, again, very strong performance there for Twisters, continuing performance there. Reagan is about to drop 56% in its second weekend. As I mentioned, I personally just don't have much interest in the film. I thought that the trailer came across as very, very cheesy and very just low budgety, like not in that strong indie feel way, but just in that way where you're like, oh man, really? Is this the direction you're kind of going with here? I've heard some mixed things about the movie itself, but $3.4 million, bringing its total domestic to 15.6. Again, really not all that strong numbers there. 56%, not the worst of drops in the world, but for a smaller film like that, it's definitely not a good number either. The Forge, $3 million there, so 35% hold. So again, percentage-wise, pretty strong hold there, but also really not a whole lot of money there. Blink Twice dropping quite a bit, 58% after a few weeks. Despicable Me 4 continuing to be in the discussion, and Afraid, the film about AI, dropping 64%. Again, no one really expected to see that movie. It's also a film where I've been asking a lot of students about this and saying, hey, have you seen this movie? Have any interest in this movie? And a lot of them are like, no, thank you. So can't say I'm surprised, really, that this film is not doing well. Let's go over to Box Office Report, get this ad out of the way. And as you can see here, very similar numbers, right? They're projected the film Beetlejuice to make around $107 million. Deadpool Wolverine expected to make $8.2 million, so probably a little bit more there. 47% hold from its 6th week going into its 7th week. Reagan is expected actually to take the number 3 spot here with $4.4 million, so that'll be interesting to watch to see if Reagan does indeed crack the top 3 or if it falls more in line with the box office theory numbers. Alien Romulus expected to make around 3.9. It ends with us 3.8, so those films once again battling it out. 3.7 for Twisters, so really kind of almost a 3-way race there. Potentially for that number 4 spot, but I would say Reagan's probably in that mix as well because, again, it's not too far above where those other films are being projected. The Front Room, which is a new film with $3.4 million, so again, film that's not really being mentioned by Box Office Theory, and The Forge expected to be in that number 8 spot according to them. Going over to Box Office Pro, the last of the box office prognosticators, we are looking here at Beetlejuice again, 115 to 145. Okay, so this is definitely the most generous of numbers for the film Beetlejuice because, yeah, we're not even seeing this number on Box Office Theory. In fact, let's go back to the site here and see what their total range is. It's $95 to $125 million. So the fact that they have a high end of 145, that's a pretty bold claim. It's pretty bold, Cotton. Let's see if it plays out for them, right? And could we potentially see the film get north of 115? It's possible. Absolutely is possible for this movie. But as I said, I ultimately would not be surprised if the opening night is huge, but then every subsequent night gets maybe a little bit less, because I don't think this is the knock it out of the park film that many of us were expecting. I had a lot of strong, high hopes for the movie and was ultimately let down quite a bit by what we ended up getting. And again, that's not going to be everyone's experience, but overall, I think that the fact that even people like me, who are, again, pretty fond of the original film, are definitely going to have an impact on this market. Yes, you might be able to make up for the millennial, maybe even Gen X crowd that is really much a fan of the original Beetlejuice that may not be as fond of this movie with some of those Gen Z crowds, right? But we also know that the Gen Z crowd itself is not always a guaranteed show. Jen Ortega is going to be somewhat of a draw, especially in a film like this. But how much of a draw is it? Is it going to be enough to drive people to the actual theaters? Or is it going to be something where people say, hey, I can just wait for it to come on streaming. I can wait for it to come on demand, whatever it might be. It's hard to say at this point. We'll know probably a bit more after the Thursday, but I would say, honestly, we won't really know for sure until after we get some of the Saturday numbers there, because, again, what the drop is between, what kind of drop we see between the Friday numbers with the Thursday premiere and the Saturday numbers is going to really kind of tell us a bit about where the audiences are falling with this movie. But again, still being projected to do quite well here. And for a film that costs $100 million, yeah, it needs to make quite a bit of money to break even. And I would say right now, it seems like it might be on pace, depending on how it does internationally. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if this film is able to get to over $300 million worldwide. But again, too early to tell at this point. Definitely going to be very strong, though, in its domestic opening. Deadpool Wolverine, $7 to $10 million. Again, still doing very well after 7 weeks. And then a toss-up for third place they have between It Ends With Us and The Front Room. So very interesting to see that both Box Office Pro and Box Office Report are mentioning that film. But again, not even being mentioned, the front room not being mentioned at all by Box Office Theory. So again, very interesting there. It does notice that it is another wide release from A24. And so obviously we're going to have to pay attention to that, but just wanted to mention that nonetheless. Going over to the charting, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. As I mentioned, with a $100 million budget, Beetlejuice needs to make almost $250 to $300 million just to break even, depending on where it makes its money. And so whether or not that movie is a flop or not is going to be, of course, dependent upon what those total numbers end up being. But what we can say is that films like 1992, yeah, expected to be a massive flop. Films like Afraid, yeah, expected to not really be that successful, right? Especially with a very weak second weekend number there. So we'll probably end up projecting the film to be a flop. But as I mentioned in the previous box office breakdown from last weekend, $14 million in losses is something you can easily make up after the fact. So if they sell the streaming rights to the movie, they can make the money back there, or just on video on demand, they could probably make enough to make some money back. I could see this being a movie that people kind of get drawn to and pulled into on the video on demand services, right? It doesn't seem like the kind of movie people would actually go out to the theater to see, but could be a film that people, especially as we are getting further into the month of September and eventually into the month of October, around the time that this film would probably become available, it could be that movie that is, getting people in the October feels as a horror/thriller film. Reagan, $12.4 million, as I mentioned, probably not going to be the biggest of financial losses in the world, but also not looking all that great either. The Crow, clearly a flop here, but not the biggest flop of the year. And also Blink Twice, still a flop. And as you can see, right now, the current numbers for Alien Rama still have the film around $-4 million. Now let's go ahead and see if we can get any updates to this, because I don't know the last time that this chart auto-updated. Yes, so still $4.2 million. Big part of that, though, is the fact that it's almost made $100 million in China, right? So it gets 25% of that box office. There's a lot of fool's gold in that market, as I always like to say, and that's the reason why it still has not made its money back based off of the most accurate information we have available to us. But do not be surprised to see, and do expect, I should say, to see that number finally get into the black after this weekend, because it is expected to make enough domestically, getting very close to $100 million, and will cross $100 million after this weekend. And that will, of course, be very good news for it as it continues to add on to its international, but also its China numbers. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Actually, and did you see Beetlejuice? As I mentioned, I gave this actually a 45% decent score. Really wasn't a great film. There were a lot of cool moments, I think, ultimately, and I'll try and give a full review of this at some point in the future. If not on the Monday live stream, I will definitely go into it. But I thought that Michael Keaton was the best part of the movie, and I think every scene with him is dynamite. He is fantastic, phenomenal. The music choices in the movie as well. Danny Elfman's score is back. Some of the soundtrack choices they choose are also quite good. Jenna Ortega is also great in the film too. The practical effects are really cool to see, but the story is just a giant mess in so many different ways, and I just don't know if that's going to be enough to bring people consistently out to the theater for this movie. I don't see the longevity of this film, but again, things can happen. So what are y'all's thoughts about that? Let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, slap that fire button, or honestly, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. Now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people, have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed August, and as always, God bless.